Hey, CFMA. I got this question the other day. What's the fundamental reason that we should have an internal rate for equipment? Now, a lot of you guys, of course, have an internal rate for equipment, and sometimes you've inherited this. Sometimes this is something that you set up from the very beginning, but it's something that especially heavy highway contractors face inevitably as they grow their business. One of the questions that comes is, why do we have this in the first place? Well, a lot of people will take this from a financial perspective, right? So if we have a profit and loss or an income statement and we have our revenue at the top and we have our direct cost section, right? Our direct cost of goods sold, one of these items will be equipment costs. And all of our other costs that we have, as well as equipment costs, end up making our gross profit. Well, unfortunately for us, most of our equipment costs, with the exception of rentals and other short-term leases, our equipment costs end up down here. Our actual equipment costs show up as an indirect. And so what we end up having to do is charge equipment revenue, or an internal equipment charge, in order to transfer this from the indirect costs up to the direct costs. This allows us, in a perfect world, to have a net zero equipment cost. Cool, that's great. That's what we do on a daily basis, Michael. Why don't you make a Hey CFMA video about that? Well, the thing is that while this happens on an ongoing basis in most companies, what people don't realize is the reason we do this in the first place. The reason we do this in the first place is not for the P&L, or at least the P&L, making the P&L happy is just a byproduct. What we're actually doing this for is so that we can make our direct costs and our direct revenue, specifically this section of our balance sheet, tie out to our job cost. Because what happens is that when we bid a job, we put together an estimate. This estimate has a bunch of things going for it. It has the revenue that we're going to charge charge our customers. It has our labor costs. It has our material costs, and it has our equipment costs. Equipment costs, which means that we end up with a margin on the job after all is said and done. Take our revenue, subtract out our materials, our labor, equipment, all the other costs that we have, and we end up with our margin. However, if we've estimated it that way, and yet when we track it, that we bring over the revenue, the billings happen, we track our labor costs, we track our material costs, but we do not track our equipment costs, what ends up happening is that we end up having our margin artificially high. Our margin is artificially high because we're missing these costs right here. So this is what's known as margin mirage. What we see with companies that don't have an internal equipment rate is that their estimates always show a lower margin than what the books show, than what your accounting system shows, because we don't have the cost of the equipment tracked to the job. It makes your project managers look like a hero, but it's not real, because if we don't have the cost here, then we also don't have the revenue here, and our equipment costs aren't zero. So even though we have a nice high gross profit, it means that we have a very low profit after indirects. This is called margin mirage, and it's a bad thing. Why is it a bad thing? Specifically because it can artificially make it so that when you're analyzing your projects, so that you can estimate them again in the future, you can accidentally go for the projects that have high margin simply because of the missing equipment, and bid on work that actually isn't profitable once you've taken into account your equipment. Don't let margin mirage end up hurting your income statement. Fundamental reason that we have an internal rate is so that your project managers track their jobs the same way that they were bid. second reason, after that is accomplished, is it makes our income statement happy by charging the direct costs where they belong and allowing us to realize whether or not we're covering our equipment costs, whether we have a net zero equipment charge. Thank you. Hopefully this was informative.